In the scorching summer of 1878, a single strand of barbed wire turned the Texas dust into a river of blood. Most neighbors settled disputes with words. The Mitchells? They settled theirs with Winchester rifles and a cold, calculated fury that would leave 12 men rotting in the sun. It wasn't about the land. It wasn't even about the money. It was about a fence line, a boundary that no one dared to cross, until a group of rival cattlemen made the fatal mistake of cutting the wire. What followed wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Today we unearthed the dark archives of the Mitchell Family Massacre. A story so brutal, the state of Texas tried to erase it from the history books. You're about to witness how a simple family of pioneers became the most feared names in the West. Lock your doors. This is the Texas Bloodbath, Coleman County, Texas, August 1882. The land stretched endlessly under a merciless sun. 40,000 acres of prairie grass, rock formations, and the only reliable water source for 30 miles in any direction. This was Mitchell territory. Wilhelm Mitchell, known to everyone as Bill, had claimed this land with German efficiency and immigrant determination. He arrived in Texas in 1871 with nothing but calloused hands and 4 sons: Heinrich, Jacob, Otto, and Klaus. 11 years later, he owned an empire. But empires need borders. And in 1882, Bill Mitchell discovered the perfect solution: Joseph Glidden's invention. Barbed wire. 6 brutal strands of twisted steel with razor-sharp barbs every few inches. Beautiful in its simplicity, devastating in its purpose. Bill Mitchell didn't just fence his own land, he fenced everything. 6 miles of wire cutting through Coleman County like a scar. Public roads, fenced. The creek that fed a dozen smaller ranches, fenced. The ancient cattle trail that homesteaders had used for generations, blocked. Bill Mitchell had just declared war on every man, woman, and child who depended on that open range to survive. The summer of 1883 arrived like a curse from hell itself. The drought came in waves of heat that cracked the earth open. Cattle dropped dead in fields that had turned to dust. Water holes that had never run dry in living memory became nothing but cracked mud. And the only water that remained? Behind 6 miles of Wilhelm Mitchell's barbed wire fence. Samuel Garrett was a good man, a family man. He had a wife named Mary, 3 daughters under the age of 10, and a small ranch of 200 acres that his father had died defending during the Civil War. Samuel had never asked for much. Just enough grass to feed his 30 head of cattle, just enough water to keep them alive through the summer. But in August 1883, Samuel Garrett watched his cattle die. One by one, their tongues swollen, their eyes glazed with the agony of thirst. All because Wilhelm Mitchell had fenced off the only creek for 30 miles. Samuel wasn't alone in his desperation. Thomas Parker, a 34-year-old father of 3. John Bremen, a former Confederate soldier who had survived Gettysburg only to face death in his own homeland. Robert Hayes, Michael O'Connor, James Whitfield. 18 men in total. Farmers, ranchers, desperate men with families to feed and cattle dying in the fields. They called themselves the Owls. They met in secret, in barns, in the dead of night. And they made a decision that would seal their fate. They would cut Wilhelm Mitchell's fence. They would reclaim the water that God had put on this earth for everyone. They would take back what was theirs. On the night of August 15th, 1883, the Owls struck. They came with wire cutters moving through the darkness like ghosts. 5 miles of fence, cut, destroyed. The barbed wire lay twisted in the dirt like dead snakes. By dawn, Wilhelm Mitchell's empire had been violated. But what the Owls didn't know was that Bill Mitchell wasn't the kind of man who forgave. He wasn't the kind of man who forgot. And he certainly wasn't the kind of man who let anyone touch what was his and live to tell about it. Bill Mitchell gathered his 4 sons in the main house. Heinrich, 19 years old, already had the eyes of a killer. Jacob, 21, was the enforcer. Otto, 17, was quiet but brutal when necessary. And Klaus, the youngest at 16, worshipped his father with the kind of blind loyalty that makes boys do terrible things. Bill Mitchell's orders were simple. No one cuts our wire and lives. Patrol the fence line every night. Shoot on sight. No warnings, no mercy, no witnesses. Heinrich Mitchell took the first shift. August 18th, 1883, 2:47 in the morning. The moon hung low and full over Coleman County, casting long shadows across the prairie. Heinrich sat on his horse near the eastern fence line, a Winchester rifle across his lap. He heard them before he saw them, the sound of wire cutters, the whisper of men trying to move quietly through the dark. Thomas Parker never saw it coming. The bullet entered his chest just below his collarbone, tearing through his lung and exiting out his back. He was dead before he hit the ground. His body lay there in the dirt, blood pooling in the Texas dust as the other owls scattered into the darkness. Heinrich Mitchell didn't chase them. He didn't need to. He had sent the message his father wanted. Touch our wire and you die. But the owls didn't run. They got angry. 3 days later, on the night of August 21st, 200 acres of Mitchell pasture burned. The fire lit up the night sky like the gates of hell had opened. Bill Mitchell stood on his porch, watching his land turn to ash, and his face showed no emotion, just cold, calculated rage. He called his sons together again. This time, the orders were different. This time, Bill Mitchell was done with warnings. He sent Jacob into the nearest town with a message and a bag of gold coins. Find me the most dangerous men you can. Men who kill for money, men who don't ask questions. Jacob Mitchell returned 3 days later with 8 men. They rode into the Mitchell ranch like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, multiplied by 2. These weren't cowboys. These weren't ranchers. These were killers. Men with dead eyes and quick hands. Men who had left trails of bodies across New Mexico and Arizona. Men who would do anything for the right price. Bill Mitchell gave them a simple job: guard the fence, kill anyone who comes near it. No exceptions. They called themselves Mitchell's Regulators, but everyone else called them what they really were: executioners. The trap was set. Bill Mitchell knew the owls would come back. Desperate men always do. So he prepared. He positioned his regulators at 3 points along the fence line. He gave them repeating rifles. He gave them ammunition. And he gave them permission to kill every single man who showed up. But Bill Mitchell wanted more than just dead enemies. He wanted information. He wanted names. He wanted to know every single member of the owls so he could hunt them down one by one. On the night of August 28th, John Brayman made a fatal mistake. He was riding home alone after visiting his sister in the next county. He took the road that ran past Mitchell's fence. He never made it home. They found him 3 days later. His body was tied to a fence post with barbed wire. The wire had cut so deep into his flesh that his clothes were soaked black with dried blood. His fingers were broken. His face was unrecognizable. But what haunted the men who found him wasn't the torture. It was the message carved into the fence post next to his body. This is what happens to owls. John Bremen had talked before he died. He had given Bill Mitchell every name, every face, every man who had dared to cut his fence. And now, Bill Mitchell had a list. A list of men who would. Samuel Garrett knew they were coming. The owls all knew. They could feel it in the air. The way people in town stopped talking when they walked by. The way even the sheriff avoided eye contact. They were marked men. So Samuel Garrett made a decision. If they were going to die anyway, they would die fighting. They would take the Mitchell family down with them. September 3rd, 1883. The owls planned their final attack. Not just cutting wire this time. They were going to burn the Mitchell house to the ground. They were going to end this war the only way desperate men know how. With blood and fire. 18 men, armed with rifles, pistols, and enough rage to burn down the whole state of Texas. They met 2 miles from the Mitchell ranch at 1 in the morning. Samuel Garrett looked at each man's face in the moonlight. Thomas Parker's brother, William, was there, eyes hollow with grief and vengeance. Robert Hayes, Michael O'Connor, James Whitfield. All of them, all desperate, all ready to die. They moved through the darkness toward the Mitchell fence line. Their plan was simple. Cut through the fence, move toward the main house, burn it, kill anyone who tried to stop them. But Bill Mitchell was already waiting. He had known they would come. He had prepared for this moment. His 4 sons and 8 regulators were positioned in 3 locations around the property. They had the high ground. They had the ammunition, and they had something the owls didn't have: the willingness to shoot men in the back. 2:17 in the morning, the owls cut through the fence and began moving toward the Mitchell house. They were 50 yards from the main building when Heinrich Mitchell fired the first shot. The sound shattered the silence like breaking glass. Samuel Garrett's head snapped back as the bullet tore through his skull. He was dead before his body hit the ground. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions. The owls were caught in a crossfire. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like lightning strikes. Men screamed. Men died. The smell of gunpowder and blood filled the air. William Parker took 2 bullets to the chest and fell face first into the dirt. Robert Hayes made it 10 feet before Jacob Mitchell's rifle round shattered his spine. Michael O'Connor tried to run. A regulator named Mason put 3 bullets in his back. James Whitfield begged for mercy. Otto Mitchell shot him in the throat. The massacre lasted 47 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 9 members of the Owls lay dead in the Mitchell property. 9 men who had come seeking justice. 9 men who had found only bullets. But Bill Mitchell wasn't finished. 3 Owls had escaped into the darkness, wounded, terrified, running for their lives. Bill Mitchell sent his regulators after them. Hunt them down, kill them, leave no witnesses. Over the next 48 hours, 3 more bodies were found. Daniel Morrison was discovered in a ravine 3 miles from the Mitchell Ranch, shot execution style in the back of the head. Patrick Sullivan was found hanging from a tree with a sign around his neck that read, "Wire Cutter." The 3rd man, whose name was never recorded in any official document, was found dragged behind a horse until his body was unrecognizable. But the most horrifying discovery came on September 6th, when a traveling preacher stumbled upon a section of the Mitchell fence that he would never forget. 12 bodies, hung on the barbed wire like grotesque scarecrows, their clothes torn, their flesh ripped by the barbs, their dead eyes staring out across the Texas prairie, as a warning to anyone who dared to cross Wilhelm Mitchell. The entire state of Texas erupted in horror and outrage. Newspapers from Dallas to Houston published stories about the Mitchell Family Massacre. Political leaders demanded justice. Citizens called for the Mitchells to be hanged in the town square. On September 12, 1883, the Texas Rangers finally arrived in Coleman County. Captain James Bradford led a company of 12 Rangers to the Mitchell Ranch. They found Bill Mitchell sitting on his porch, smoking a pipe, as calm as if he were watching a Sunday sunset. The Rangers arrested Bill Mitchell and his 4 sons. They arrested 6 of the 8 regulators. 2 had already fled to Mexico. The trial began in January 1884 in the Coleman County Courthouse. The prosecution presented evidence of premeditated murder, witness testimony, physical evidence, the barbed wire still stained with blood. But Bill Mitchell's defense was brilliant in its simplicity. Self-defense, protection of property. The Owls had come to his land, armed, in the middle of the night, with the intent to burn his home and kill his family. What was he supposed to do? Let them? The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Not guilty. All charges dismissed. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Half the people cheered, half screamed in outrage. But Bill Mitchell just stood there, stone-faced, and walked out of that courtroom a free man. The political fallout was immediate. Governor John Ireland called a special legislative session on October 15, 1883. On January 8, 1884, the Texas legislature passed the most comprehensive fence-cutting law in American history. Cutting fences became a felony punishable by 1 to 5 years in state prison. Burning pastures carried a sentence of 2 to 5 years. But the law also targeted the ranchers. Fencing public land became a misdemeanor. Fences that crossed public roads required gates every 3 miles. The era of unlimited fencing was over. But the law came too late for the 12 men who died on Wilhelm Mitchell's fence. Too late for their widows. Too late for their children who grew up without fathers. Bill Mitchell lived until 1891. He died in his sleep at the age of 62, surrounded by his sons and grandchildren. He never expressed remorse. He never apologized. He never acknowledged that what he did was wrong. In his mind, he had simply protected what was his. The fence remained standing until 1920, when the last of the Mitchell family sold the land and moved to California. But if you drive through Coleman County today, you can still find the place where it happened. 3 miles west of town, there's an old cemetery that most people don't know exists. 12 graves, 12 crosses, no names, just dates, all from September 1883. The locals call it the Wire Cutter Cemetery, and they say that on windy nights when the air is just right, you can still hear the screams of men dying in the barbed wire. You can still hear the gunshots. You can still feel the terror of that night when Wilhelm Mitchell and his sons turned a fence line into a graveyard. The fence-cutting wars cost Texas $20 million in damages, at least 20 documented deaths, hundreds of families destroyed, and it all started with 6 miles of barbed wire, a German immigrant named Wilhelm Mitchell, and the belief that some men have the right to fence off the world, no matter how many bodies pile up along the way. This is the story they don't teach in history books. This is the Texas bloodbath, the night when barbed wire became a weapon, when a fence became a death sentence, and when 12 men learned the hard way that in the West, some boundaries are defended with bullets, not words. Sleep well tonight. And remember, some fences are built not to keep cattle in, but to keep humanity out.